The Arizona Territory had a way of testing every soul who crossed its endless horizon. The wind carried dust instead of mercy, and every canyon hid either opportunity or danger. In the spring of 1884, the Brooks Ranch stretched across thousands of acres like a kingdom carved from stubborn determination. Travelers often called its owner, Marshal William Brooks, the warlord of the frontier, not because he ruled with fear, but because no outlaw dared challenge the disciplined riders who defended his land. 31-year-old Caleb Hayes had never cared much for titles. The handsome cowboy believed a man's worth was measured by his actions, not by the stories people told around campfires. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark chestnut hair brushing his collar and thoughtful blue eyes that had seen too much hardship, Caleb carried himself with quiet confidence. Years as an Army scout had sharpened his instincts, while years spent driving cattle had taught him patience. Those who knew him trusted him with their lives. That was why William Brooks had asked Caleb to escort his daughter home from Silver Creek. 27-year-old Evelyn Brooks climbed into the wagon just after sunrise. Her flowing red hair caught the morning light like polished copper, and her emerald green eyes reflected both intelligence and determination. She wore a dark green frontier dress beneath a tan riding coat, practical enough for the journey, yet elegant enough to remind anyone she belonged to one of the wealthiest families in Arizona Territory. Unlike many women raised in comfort, Evelyn preferred dusty trails to drawing rooms. "I hope you don't mind a long ride," she said with an easy smile. Caleb adjusted the reins. "I've spent half my life in the saddle, Miss Brooks. Another day won't hurt." She laughed softly. "Please, if we're traveling together all day, call me Evelyn." He nodded politely. "Then you'll have to call me Caleb." The horses settled into a steady pace as they left the town behind. Endless prairie slowly gave way to towering sandstone cliffs, where narrow trails twisted through deep canyons. Caleb studied every ridge as naturally as breathing. He noticed broken branches where there should have been none, fresh hoof prints leading away from the trail, and smoke rising briefly before disappearing behind distant rocks. Someone had been watching the road. Evelyn noticed his silence. Something wrong. Maybe nothing. She raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound convincing." Caleb offered a faint smile. "I've learned to trust my instincts." She looked toward the cliffs. "My father always says the same thing." The conversation faded as both listened to the strange quiet surrounding them. Usually the canyon echoed with birds and coyotes. Today there was only wind. Caleb rested one hand near the revolver at his hip. "We'll move a little faster." The horses broke into a trot. Nearly an hour later, the narrowest part of the canyon came into view. Jagged cliffs towered above both sides, leaving little room to maneuver. Caleb's heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Danger always announced itself through silence. Then it happened. A sharp whistle sliced through the air. An arrow struck the wagon's wooden side only inches from Evelyn's shoulder. The horses screamed. "Down!" Caleb shouted. Before she could react, another volley poured from both cliffs. Dozens of arrows darkened the sky. Hidden among the rocks, masked riders loyal to the outlaw Silas, Crow emerged with powerful hunting bows. Crow had hired expert archers to weaken travelers before his gunmen closed in. The lead horse reared violently. The wagon lurched sideways. Wood cracked. One wheel struck a boulder, tipping the entire wagon onto its side. Dust exploded into the air. Caleb hit the ground hard but rolled to his feet almost instantly. Drawing his revolver, he fired toward the ridge, forcing several attackers back behind cover. "Evelyn." "I'm here." She crawled from beneath the broken wagon, coughing through the dust. Another arrow streaked toward her. Caleb saw it first. Without hesitation, he threw himself between Evelyn and the incoming shot. The first poisoned arrow buried itself deep into his shoulder blade. He grunted but remained standing. Before he could regain balance, a second arrow slammed into the opposite side of his back. Pain exploded through his body. Evelyn gasped. "Caleb." The attackers kept firing. A third arrow cut through the air. There was no time to dodge. Caleb wrapped both arms around Evelyn, turning his back toward the danger. The final poisoned arrow drove into the center of his back with sickening force. His knees nearly buckled. Every breath burned like fire. Still, he refused to fall. Instead, he drew his second revolver. Ignoring the poison spreading through his body, Caleb fired carefully at the cliff tops. Each shot forced another attacker into hiding. The archers had expected panic. Instead, they faced a wounded man who refused to surrender. From somewhere beyond the canyon came another sound. Horse hooves. Many of them. The thunder of approaching riders echoed between the cliffs. Silas Crow's men exchanged nervous glances. "They've got reinforcements," one shouted. A bugle sounded from the eastern trail. Within moments, nearly 20 Brooks Ranch riders charged into the canyon, rifles raised. Luke Mercer led the charge. "Drive them off." Gunfire erupted. Crow's hired archers abandoned their positions and disappeared into the maze of cliffs before the ranch riders could surround them. Silence slowly returned. Caleb finally lowered his revolvers. His vision blurred. The poison was working faster than he wanted to admit. Evelyn caught him as he staggered. Blood soaked through his shirt, dripping onto the dusty ground. "You saved me," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. He managed a weak smile. "I figured your father might not appreciate bringing you home full of arrows." Despite everything, she laughed through her tears. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed into her arms. Luke Mercer dismounted immediately. His expression hardened the moment he saw the black discoloration spreading around the arrow wounds. "Poison," he said grimly. "We have to move now." Evelyn gripped Caleb's hand tightly. "He cannot die." Luke nodded. "No." The riders carefully lifted Caleb onto a horse-drawn rescue litter and raced toward Brooks Ranch without stopping. Hours later, Marshal William Brooks stood on the porch as the injured cowboy was carried through the front gates. One look at the 3 poisoned arrows still lodged in Caleb's back told him everything he needed to know. Dr. Samuel Pierce rushed from the ranch house, his face growing pale as he examined the wounds. He looked directly at William. "If we don't remove the poison before nightfall," the old doctor said quietly, "this brave young man won't live to see another sunrise." William stared silently at the unconscious cowboy who had nearly given his life to save his daughter. For the first time in many years, the legendary marshal removed his hat, bowed his head, and prayed that courage alone would be enough to keep Caleb Hayes alive. Night settled over Brooks Ranch like a heavy blanket, but no one slept. Every lamp inside the main house burned through the darkness as Dr. Samuel Pierce fought to save Caleb Hayes. The old physician had treated gunshot wounds, broken bones, rattlesnake bites, and fever outbreaks during 40 years on the frontier, yet the 3 poisoned arrows worried him more than any bullet ever could. William Brooks stood outside the bedroom door with his arms folded. He had faced outlaws, cattle thieves, and ruthless land barons without flinching. Watching a brave young man struggle for life was somehow harder. Inside the room, Caleb drifted in and out of feverish dreams. His breathing became shallow. His skin burned with heat, and every few minutes violent shivers ran through his battered body. Dr. Pierce carefully removed the broken arrowheads one by one. The poison had already begun spreading through Caleb's blood. "We'll need willow bark tea," the doctor instructed. "And fresh water," Evelyn answered before anyone else could move. She hurried downstairs herself. Every hour she returned with cool cloths, fresh bandages, and warm broth that Caleb could barely swallow. For 3 days the battle continued. Sometimes Caleb's breathing steadied. Sometimes it nearly stopped. The entire ranch seemed to move more quietly, as if loud voices alone might steal away the cowboy's fragile chance of survival. Even the stable hands whispered prayers. Luke Mercer visited every evening. Standing beside the bed, he watched the unconscious cowboy with growing respect. "I misjudged him," Luke admitted to William one afternoon. The older man nodded. "So did I." William had already begun gathering every detail about the canyon attack. His deputies questioned witnesses. Scouts followed tracks left by the fleeing attackers. Every report told the same story. Caleb had several chances to escape. He had ignored every one of them. Instead of protecting himself, he had thrown his own body in front of Evelyn without hesitation. No order. No expectation of reward. Simply because someone else's life mattered more than his own. William quietly removed his spectacles. There aren't many men left like that. On the 4th morning, Caleb's fever finally began to break. Evelyn sat beside him with a book resting unopened in her lap. She had spent hours reading aloud during the previous days, hoping that somewhere behind the fever he could still hear her voice. Sunlight filtered gently through the bedroom curtains. Caleb's fingers moved. His eyelids slowly opened. Everything looked blurry. The ceiling. The window. Then a familiar face came into focus. Evelyn smiled through tears she had tried so hard to hide. "Welcome back." Caleb blinked several times. His voice came out rough. "I was beginning to think that Canyon won." She laughed softly. "Not while Dr. Pierce and half this ranch were fighting for you." He tried to sit up. Pain shot through his back. The doctor immediately pushed him back onto the pillow. "Easy." Caleb winced. "I felt better." "I imagine you have," Dr. Pierce replied. "But you're alive." William entered quietly. For a long moment neither man spoke. Finally the marshal stepped closer. "My daughter tells me you took 3 poisoned arrows that were meant for her." Caleb shrugged carefully. It seemed like the right thing to do. William studied him. "No." The room grew silent. It was the extraordinary thing to do. Those simple words carried more weight than any speech. Caleb lowered his eyes. "I'd do it again." William believed him completely. Recovery came slowly. Weeks passed before Caleb could walk across the ranch without leaning on a fence. The wounds healed, but the scars remained. Each morning he insisted on helping wherever he could despite Dr. Pierce's protests. He repaired broken corrals, helped train young horses, mended wagon wheels, worked beside ranch hands without asking for special treatment. The workers noticed. They had expected a celebrated hero. Instead they found a humble cowboy who carried lumber, shoveled hay, and laughed alongside everyone else. Respect spread naturally. Luke Mercer challenged Caleb to target practice one afternoon. The entire ranch gathered to watch. Caleb's shoulder still ached, but he accepted anyway. Tin cans were placed across the pasture. Luke fired first. 4 perfect shots. The crowd applauded. Caleb calmly stepped forward. He drew his revolver with smooth confidence. 5 shots echoed across the valley. 5 cans flew into the air. The ranch erupted with cheers. Luke laughed first. "I guess I owe you dinner." Caleb smiled. "You already saved my life." "Then we're even." Friendship replaced rivalry. Meanwhile, Evelyn found herself seeking reasons to spend time with Caleb. Sometimes they rode horses through flowering meadows. Other times they walked quietly among grazing cattle as the evening sun painted the hills gold. She admired his kindness. He admired her strength. Neither rushed what was growing between them. One evening they stopped beside a small creek where cottonwood trees swayed gently in the breeze. "You nearly died because of me," Evelyn said softly. Caleb looked toward the flowing water. "I nearly lived because of you." She smiled. "I don't understand. If I hadn't accepted your father's escort job, I'd still be drifting from ranch to ranch." He looked at her. "Now I know what home feels like." Her cheeks warmed. Neither said another word. The silence spoke for them. "I've spent 30 years protecting this territory." The crowd grew quiet. "I've known brave men, but few willing to give their lives for another without expecting anything in return." He motioned Caleb forward. Reluctantly, the cowboy obeyed. William removed the silver command badge from Luke Mercer's jacket. Luke smiled knowingly. Then William placed the badge into Caleb's hand. "From this day forward, Caleb Hayes commands my elite frontier riders." Murmurs swept through the crowd. William continued. "He'll oversee ranch security. He'll receive a full partner's share of future cattle drives. And as long as he wishes." William paused. "This ranch will always be his home." For several seconds Caleb couldn't speak. He had spent years sleeping beneath stars, never staying anywhere long enough to belong. Now someone had handed him a future. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." William placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You've already said it. With your actions." The applause echoed across the ranch. But while celebration filled Brooks Ranch, another gathering took place miles away inside an abandoned mining camp. Silas Crow slammed his fist onto a rough wooden table. 3 arrows. His voice dripped with fury. 3 poisoned arrows. And he's still alive. One outlaw lowered his head. The Brooks doctor saved him. Silas smiled coldly. "Then we'll finish what we started." He spread a map across the table. "The Brooks Ranch isn't just another cattle operation. It's the strongest force left standing between us and control of this territory." His finger tapped the ranch house. "We burn it." Then he pointed toward Caleb's name, freshly written beside it. And this time, the cowboy dies first. Far away, as darkness settled once again over Brooks Ranch, Caleb stood on the porch beside Evelyn, unaware that an even greater storm was riding toward them. The arrows had failed. Now the real war was about to begin. The warning came before sunrise. A lone Brooks Ranch scout rode through the front gate, his exhausted horse covered in foam and dust. He barely waited for the animal to stop before sliding from the saddle. "They are coming," he gasped. "The Crow gang." The scout nodded. "More than 50 riders. They are burning homesteads and cutting supply lines. They'll reach Brooks Ranch in 2 days." The peaceful morning vanished instantly. William Brooks gathered every rider in the main barn. Maps were spread across a large wooden table, while ranch hands hurried to reinforce corrals, move livestock, and store food. Every man and woman on the ranch understood that this would not be an ordinary outlaw raid. Silas Crow intended to destroy everything William Brooks had built. William looked toward Caleb. "You know soldiers. I know outlaws. And now you know this ranch." He rested both hands on the table. "How do we stop him?" Every eye turned toward Caleb Hayes. Only weeks earlier he had arrived as an injured stranger. Now dozens of experienced riders waited for his orders. Caleb studied the map carefully. "If Crow wants a straight fight, we don't give him one." He pointed toward a narrow canyon several miles east. "He'll expect us to defend the ranch. We'll meet him before he gets here." Luke Mercer smiled. "Now that's thinking." For the next 2 days Brooks Ranch became a fortress. Women prepared food and ammunition. Blacksmiths repaired horseshoes and wagon wheels. Sharpshooters practiced from sunrise until sunset. Evelyn refused to remain safely inside the house. She organized medical supplies, delivered messages between riders, and comforted frightened families arriving from neighboring ranches that had already been attacked. Late one evening she found Caleb sitting alone beside the horse corral, checking the leather straps on his saddle. "You've hardly rested." He smiled. "I'll sleep after Crow's gone." She sat beside him. Moonlight reflected in her emerald eyes. "I've been afraid before." She looked toward the dark horizon. "But never like this." Caleb reached for her hand. His rough fingers gently wrapped around hers. "I won't let him reach this ranch." "You can't promise that." "I can promise I'll do everything in my power." She squeezed his hand. "I know." For a long moment they simply watched the stars. Then Evelyn quietly stood. She leaned down and kissed Caleb gently on the cheek. "Come back to me." Before he could answer, she walked toward the ranch house. Caleb touched his cheek and smiled. He had faced battles before. Now he finally had someone worth fighting for. The following afternoon a cloud of dust appeared across the eastern plains. Silas Crow had arrived. His riders thundered across the open ground with rifles slung over their shoulders, while mounted archers rode along both flanks carrying bows fitted with poisoned arrows. Silas raised one hand. There. In the distance stood Brooks Canyon, exactly where Caleb hoped he would go. Hidden among the towering rocks, Brooks' riders waited silently. When the outlaws entered the narrow pass, Caleb raised his hand. Hold. The canyon grew quieter. The gang rode deeper. Hold. Silas smiled confidently. No one's here. Then Caleb dropped his arm. Now. Rifle fire echoed from both cliffs. The outlaws scattered in confusion. Horses reared. Several riders dropped their weapons as bullets shattered rocks around them. Luke Mercer led one group down the western slope, while William Brooks charged from the eastern trail. Caught between both forces, Crow's gang struggled to regroup. Silas shouted orders. Push through. But Caleb had anticipated every move. Wagons hidden behind the rocks rolled forward, blocking the canyon exit. The outlaws were trapped. The battle erupted into complete chaos. Dust filled the air. Gunfire echoed endlessly between the canyon walls. Mounted riders clashed in fierce running fights. Caleb remained near the center, directing his men while protecting wounded riders whenever possible. He refused to abandon anyone. Just as victory seemed close, Silas Crow spotted Caleb across the battlefield. There you are. He spurred his horse forward. The two men met in the middle of the canyon. Silas fired first. The bullet struck a nearby rock. Silas laughed. You should have died from those arrows. Caleb calmly reloaded. I had too much to live for. Silas charged with his revolver raised. At the last moment Caleb stepped aside. Silas lost control of his horse, crashing heavily into the rocky ground. His revolver slid several feet away. Before he could reach it, Caleb stood over him. "It's over." Silas looked around. His riders were surrendering. William looked at the defeated outlaw. "Silas Crow, you're under arrest for murder, robbery, arson, and conspiracy against the territory." Deputies secured heavy iron handcuffs around Silas's wrists. Families returned to abandoned homesteads. Freight wagons traveled safely again. Towns celebrated the end of Crow's reign. A week later, Brooks Ranch hosted the largest gathering in its history. Neighbors, ranchers, deputies, and merchants filled the courtyard. William Brooks stood before them. When Caleb Hayes arrived here, he smiled. "He was simply the man who saved my daughter." He looked proudly toward the young cowboy. "Today he is the man who saved this entire frontier." The crowd erupted into applause. William stepped down from the porch. For a brief moment neither man spoke. Then William embraced Caleb like a father embracing his son. "You earned more than my gratitude." His voice softened. "You earned my family." Caleb's eyes glistened. He had wandered the frontier alone for years. Now he finally belonged somewhere. William turned toward Evelyn. "I believe my daughter has something she'd like to say." The beautiful red-haired woman stepped forward, smiling warmly. She looked directly into Caleb's blue eyes. "You once told me you discovered what home feels like." She reached for his hands. "So did I." Caleb smiled. "Evelyn Brooks." He knelt on one knee. "I don't have a mansion. I don't have riches. But I'll spend every day making sure you never doubt how deeply you're loved. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Evelyn's eyes as she laughed happily. "Yes. Always yes." Cheers echoed across the ranch as William proudly placed their hands together. Months later, beneath a brilliant Arizona sunset, wedding bells rang across Brooks Ranch. Friends, neighbors, and riders gathered to celebrate not only a marriage, but also the beginning of a new chapter. Caleb continued leading the frontier riders with honor. Evelyn helped expand the ranch into a place where struggling families could find work and safety, and William slowly stepped back, knowing the future rested in capable hands. Sometimes Caleb would pause near the canyon where everything had changed. The scars on his back still reminded him of the poisoned arrows that had nearly ended his life. Yet he no longer saw them as marks of pain. They had become symbols of courage, sacrifice, and the unexpected blessings that followed. By choosing to protect one innocent life, he had found love, purpose, and the family he had never believed he would have. On the wild frontier, where danger often seemed stronger than hope, Caleb Hayes proved that honor could still change destinies, and that the greatest reward for courage was not wealth or fame, but a home filled with peace, loyalty, and lasting love.